Welcome to the American Shoulder and Elbow Surgeons Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Chalmers, a shoulder and elbow surgeon at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Dr. Brian Waterman of Wake Forest in North Carolina. Brian, how are you?
Hey, Peter. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm really excited to do this. Before we get started, I should mention the views expressed in this podcast do not necessarily affect the views of the American Shoulder and Elbow Surgeons Society, the University of Utah, Wake Forest University, or the institutions of really any of our guests. So today I'm very excited for us to discuss emerging uses of artificial intelligence in shoulder surgery. After the release of ChatGPT-4, there was widespread enthusiasm for large language models. And now the dust has settled, I think we're really starting to see some of the applications of this technology emerge. So to discuss, I've invited two people with an interest in this area. So first, from Atrium Health in Charlotte, North Carolina, we have Dr. Justin Smith. Justin, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Peter. Thanks for having me.
And next, from the Rothman Institute in Philadelphia, we have Dr. Surena Namdari. Surena, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me.
All right, well, let's start with a place where I think a lot of people are already using this. So we've seen iterative changes to decrease the burden of documentation, from dictaphones to transcriptionists to embedded speech recognition software, and all have presented unique challenges, and some of them can consume valuable overhead on the part of the healthcare system. So now when we have AI, and AI obviously is changing the way that we do medical records. So I wanted to ask both of you, are you currently using AI-powered tools for documentation of the medical record? If so, how or how not? And what do you see as the kind of strength and weaknesses of technology in that specific situation? Surena, maybe let's start with you.
So I'm not currently using AI to document in the clinic, but we are doing a pilot at our at Rothman where we're investigating using AI scribes. And so, for people who may not be familiar, it's basically, it will listen to your interaction with a patient and then generate a clinical note after your interaction is complete, based on what was discussed and what, you said and what the patient said. So it's not, we haven't implemented it prime time yet, but there's a small group that are looking at it at a very grassroots level right now. But I think that that's one of the applications that could be really interesting for AI because, documentation in clinic takes so much of our time.
I know, Surena, you see a large number of referrals from your surrounding area. Have you noticed already notes from referring doctors that are written by AI? Can you tell a difference? Or written maybe notes from your partners that are part of kind of that nucleus that's trialing it? Like, what do you think of the notes that it writes?
To be honest, it's hard to tell. And I think we'll get into this with some of the other applications of AI where it's hard to tell what's written by AI and what's not. So many doctors now use templates, which bring in so much data from prior notes and records automatically that a lot of the notes have a lot of fluff in them to begin with for coding reasons. And so I think it becomes really challenging to actually figure out what comes from AI and what's coming from just a pulled over partial note versus what's actually dictated. I think what's actually easier to tell is what's dictated by some of our older physicians who maybe don't worry as much about how in-depth they are with their documentation and how much they carry over for billing purposes. Those you can tell are from an actual person.
What about you, Justin?
Yeah, so we're fortunate. We trialed DAX Copilot, which is an AI platform that the Dragon Nuance software that a lot of people are familiar with came from. And it's AI, and we've gone through several iterations of it, and it keeps getting better just from feedback of, some of the primary care sports and the surgeons that are using it. And it's honestly saved me a ton of time in the clinic. Essentially, you dictate into it's all built into Epic now. And so I dictate into Epic, I walk into the room, it listens to the encounter. I quickly just dictate the physical exam, assessment plan, and it generates a note that's pulled directly into my note in Epic. The next iteration of it is you'll be able to say orders in the clinical encounter, and it'll automatically pull those orders into the queue that you can later sign. And you may be able to have smart phrases that you can dictate that will pull in certain order sets and so forth. And I think it's been really cool. It's been a big game changer. I know the residents used an app called Freed, which is, just kind of a paid for app on your iPhone, as they don't have access to the DAX just because it's expensive for individuals. It's individual subscription. But it's really changed the game to kind of, dive into the question you asked Surena about, can you tell the difference? I can tell the difference. My notes before DAX were much more simple, pretty direct, just really boilerplate, what you need to know, typical orthopedic note. But it adds a lot more, I think, somewhat relevant, a lot more of the medical type information. Sometimes a lot of their comorbidities, medications that they're taking, stuff like that are applicable, especially in a surgical setting. And so it's kind of nice. And sometimes too, it'll pull in information that you may have missed, as somebody's potentially just kind of, going on a little long-winded, and pull in information that is pertinent to the encounter.
Yeah, Justin, you and I are on common platform, and our EMR affords this. I do love the convenience of it. Some of the things I struggle with is kind of the colloquial nature of the language you use to relate to the patient, and then how that translates to the note. And so I'm constantly left with this existential crisis. Do I go with a pre-existing template and smart phrases, or I just pursue something for the sake of ease? Where have you fallen out on that? Do you use a hybrid? Maybe walk us through your process.
Yeah, it's a good question. I definitely use a hybrid. The major areas are, right, your HPI, results, physical exam, assessment plan. I'm very particular in, the typical way they taught us how to do it is just kind of dictate your physical exam as you're in the clinical encounter. I find that it's not quite as accurate. I think especially in the orthopedic realm, we're very precise about our physical exams and, the names of the maneuvers and so forth, and how you want that written out so that it's easy to communicate with other surgeons and providers. And so I'm very particular about that. And when you dictate into it, it will pull exactly what you say, as opposed to if you're trying to just say it out loud. The assessment plan, right now, it seems like it's mostly tailored just kind of generically, like you alluded to. It's not very specialty specific. And so oftentimes, we'll be talking about their diabetes and, trying to make sure that their A1C and so forth is, permissive for surgery. And then it'll pull it into the assessment plan as if I'm managing their diabetes, which I'm not. So then I kind of have to go back, delete some stuff, and kind of clean that up. So there's definitely room to, improve as it becomes more specialty specific. I know we're, working with the AI on top of the AI that can change it. For example, you walk in the room and you mistakenly say, Miss, Mr. Smith, and it's a Miss Smith, you just offhand, and it'll change. It'll have all the, adjective or all the she, throughout the entire template. And you can have AI change it all. Say, oh, I misspoke. It's actually a male, and it'll change all the wording throughout it. So there are certain tools that make it a little easier to format some of it.
Justin, I just want to follow up with you. It sounds like it sounds like, number one, it allows your notes to be more detailed. But from what I'm hearing, it sounds like it creates a note, and then you're still reading and editing pretty much every note that it creates, and adding things in, saying, well, the exam, that's not exactly what I meant, or the discussion, I don't want that. I don't want it to act like I'm managing their diabetes. Is that right? Or are there increasingly notes where you do not feel like you have to read them?
Yeah, I would say more often than not, I'm going back and changing things. Just because, the importance of the notes is huge. And sometimes it'll misconstrue certain, associations. You may be talking about multiple problems, and it'll pull in symptoms of one into the other, and sometimes the flow isn't, exactly correct. And oftentimes it's gotten better with each, upgrade, or each, new iteration that comes out. In the very initial stages, it would pull in swear words that the patients had said. And I thought that was kind of funny, but obviously I have to edit that before you submit that.
Can I ask a question, Justin? Is there a cost that your practice sees with this, or is it covered by your hospital? How are you guys managing the price of this technology?
Yeah, it's the hospital that pays for it, and it's a per provider cost. And I know it's not small.
Yeah, Surena, I had to forfeit my initial license on a fee schedule basis for this, but this was baked into our system. And so it definitely is a fringe benefit that's continued to, I think, streamline our care and maybe limit the amount of touches on your EMR. I'm curious from your perspective, a lot of times you see at the end of the note, there's these disclaimers that say AI technology was utilized to generate this documentation, or a dictaphone was used to generate this information, almost as a disclaimer that if there are any errors that we're not liable. Do you think this holds water? Is this something that really is actionable, or avoids maybe some of the potential mistakes or typos? Just curious.
Personally, I don't think it does. I mean, I practice in Philadelphia, which is the most litigious city in the country. So, people can sue for just about anything. And I think at the end of the day, the onus would be on the physician to review the notes, like Justin was talking about. So, I think you can put that disclaimer on, but I'm not sure that it would actually hold up and protect you. But that's just my opinion based on what I see in Philadelphia.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, every, risk management person I've talked to says those, it makes you feel better, but it doesn't change anything.
Well, I certainly don't want to steer us down the legal route. I think that's fraught with probably hurt feelings and certainly a lot of emotionally charged conversations. One of the other things that Peter and I were talking about is just how really a lot of the contemporary academic groups, hospital operations have becoming increasingly decentralized, a lot of different local offices to meet the communities around them. And so we've seen the virtual space as kind of the modern water cooler discussion. We have group meetings there, we have collective conversations with our groups. And I'm curious, how have you all used these AI tools to support these meetings, either to take notes, to record transcripts? How have you leveraged this technology? Maybe, Surena, we could start with you.
So, many of the committees that I've been involved in, the secretary of the committee or of board meetings will use AI to generate the minutes for the meeting, and then they'll review them and edit them and then send them out. So I think there are tasks like transcription for meetings that can be made significantly easier using this kind of technology. It's also very useful for generating notes that are not patient related for some of the other tasks that we may have to do administratively, where we have to send recommendations or final approvals for completion of tasks to people. It can be very helpful for those kinds of tasks that take time, that, frankly, it's just checking a box that it's either done or not done.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. I use it a ton for administrative type tasks, be it product approvals, emails to administrators, requesting things. I'd never written a medical red shirt letter. And so I asked ChatGPT to draft me a letter with, for some of my athletes. And so it's been super helpful in a lot of those, pretty time consuming, composition of, pieces. I know, Peter, we kind of put together, I sent him a PowerPoint that I'd given to some of my colleagues that was generated by AI. And, AI is only as good as the information that you give it, as well as, the question that you ask it. And so, people ask me all the time, well, how are you able to get these responses and get the content that you want out of it? And it's very much, you got to kind of tell it, all right, well, this is the level of, speaking that you want. You're an orthopedic surgeon. This is what I want from you. This is the format that I want. And here's the, database or where I want you to gather your information. And that's more likely to get you the response that you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we really get to the crux of this. Is what's really changed with ChatGPT is that it can write so well. So it sounds like both of you are using it as an assistant for some administrative tasks like for instance, I think the classic one is, you have to write a letter to the insurance company to jump through some hoop to get some surgery approved. I think we all know that the vast majority of those things get approved. This is just supposed to be wasting your time. The idea is that a certain number of surgeons give up. That's the reason why they make you do this, not because they're actually, ensuring the patient receives adequate care. So we feel, I think, all very comfortable putting that through AI to write us a letter. But the question is, that's only a fraction of the writing that we do as academic surgeons, right? There's a lot of writing that we do as, for instance, writing manuscripts. So where is, this is a slippery slope as we get into publishing. I think the real question for both of you is where do we stand on that? I know that there are many students that are using this increasingly in school to write papers. Is this a tool that we should use to our advantage, or do we need to maintain author control? And if something AI writes, is it no longer yours? Because I think this is really the crux of the issue when we talk about large language models and what they do differently from what we've had previously. What are your thoughts, Surena?
I think you're right. This gets into the ethics of AI, and particularly ethics in publishing. I think there's a substantial difference between predictive AI, which is basically entering data into a learning model, and then it pumps out a prediction of either what you would want to say or what a patient's risk factors are. That's totally different than generative AI, which is creating new things. And so, for example, there have been multiple papers now that have been published where AI has generated abstracts or full manuscripts that people cannot tell the difference between the falsified manuscript or abstract and a original piece of work. There are issues if you have AI write that it could lead to plagiarism because it's taking from prior texts. And so, I think these are all really substantial issues. There's question marks about should AI be listed as a co-author on manuscripts. My personal opinion is that there isn't a huge role for generative AI in research. I think that research is designed to explore new ideas. AI right now is designed more to filter old ideas or what's already been published and piece it together in a new format. So, and I don't think AI currently meets the guidelines for authorship that we think about when we submit to a journal. It doesn't have the ability to do every one of those tasks that you would need one of your authors to do. So, personally, I can see AI having some value for somebody if they're trying to write an introduction maybe to a paper that then would have to be edited. But I don't think that that we should fall down the rabbit hole of AI generating our manuscripts.
Justin, what are your thoughts? Where does the line lie here?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. You definitely need to use it as a tool and not a replacement, right? You don't want AI to be really, manufacturing these manuscripts without, significant oversight. And I don't know about making it an author. It's kind of a fun idea, but I mean, you definitely need to disclose the utilization of AI. I think, some of us are very gifted writers. Some of us have, difficulty, conveying some of our research and our data into, a palatable format. And I think AI can help supplement that to be able to help you write a little more eloquently and convey these ideas that are a little bit easier to take in by individuals. And so I think in that utilization, it's good. If it helps us help others, that's good. Data mining and being able to churn through mass amounts of data, registries, all this kind of stuff, I think that's helpful. But you got to know what it's doing it, how it's doing it, and keep it within its little box. And, like, Surena mentioned, once it starts getting outside of the little box and becoming generative, then it kind of, the wheels come off, and, some of the information that it might be pulling from might not be, as accurate as you would want it to be, especially in our space, wanting to really be, very particular about where, information is coming from, citing it and so forth. But I think it's here, like you said, it's being used in colleges and campuses. It's seen you before you've seen it, and it's very hard to tell the difference. And so I think we're going to end up having AI tools to be able to discern what was written by AI and be able to kind of counter this, because it's going to happen and people may or may not disclose it. So I think we got to get on top of it and kind of, put the rules in place now to kind of help guide this transformation.
Yeah, I see it very similar to kind of what we're doing, what's currently done with plagiarism. There are softwares that will tell the editors what percent plagiarism score and a paper gets. And similarly, if you use I think it's GPT-0 is the AI detection software, and so that can similarly give a score for what percent of the paper is felt to be generated by AI. And so then, each journal has to decide what's an appropriate number. But, there can be significant value if somebody is not a native English speaker and they write a brilliant research paper in Arabic, and then they want to translate that into English. I mean, there's nothing better than AI to help them do that quickly. And it's their own thoughts. It's just, translated. So I think there's huge applications in research, but it's just when it comes to actually creating new information, it can be it can bridge that ethical line.
Yeah, Surena, I'm glad you draw that parallel, because I really see this as the same kind of ethical debate that was previously encountered with either auto plagiarism or plagiarism of another source. Maybe the ethical guardrails aside, how are you using this for other applications like public-facing educational content, information for your websites, in your organizations? Justin, are you using this currently in any of those applications, promotional videos, et cetera?
Yeah, I think it's huge in that space. I've been working with JSES now and ASES to create, social media content, help with, some of the literature reviews, stuff like that. And the more patient-focused things, what I'll do is I'll say, hey, ChatGPT, you're an orthopedic surgeon creating content for your patients written at a fourth grade reading level. Here's an article that I want you to reference and create. I can either do an infographic or do a video. If I do a video, please create a script for the video that you're going to disseminate to your patients. Keep it 90 seconds long. I'll take that script, put it into CapCut, and then it pulls associated clips from that are like Adobe stock type clips, and then it creates a video based on that script, and you can edit the script how you want it. And so then you've got a nice summary of a research article written at a fourth grade reading level that's pretty palatable for your patients. I'm starting to create content for my post-op protocols. I'll upload my post-op protocol. Please explain expected recovery after rotator cuff repair, do's, don'ts, that kind of thing. There are companies and certain AI applications like Revel AI that will essentially, you take a couple photos of your own face and then it'll create an AI avatar of you. And then you use AI to create a script. Say, for example, you upload your post-op protocol, it's got your face, and then it's basically you talking about your expected rehabilitation after shoulder arthroplasty, what have you. And so that then it's sent out to your patients. They feel a little bit more personable because it's you actually talking. And then it's got all of your written stuff, but written in kind of a more eloquent script. And so it's kind of changed the game. It saves me just hours and hours and hours of creating this content.
Surena, what about you? Are we dinosaurs here? Is this something you're using? I've got my pen and paper out. I've already taken some notes off what Justin shared, but how are you using this in a competitive market like Philadelphia?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely, I definitely use it. I think there are, applications with chatbot, which, I've worked with a company that has developed basically a tool where, patients can ask questions and it will answer them during the recovery. It's similar to, we all go through this with calling customer service, and you're on a long wait and they say, oh, you can go to our website or to our app and interact live with a customer service rep. That rep is generally an AI application. And something similar exists for medicine. And so I think, that does have some value. There's multiple studies now that show that AI can relatively accurately answer general questions that people have about the recovery after shoulder procedures and other procedures. It's helped me a lot with presentations that are not geared towards my orthopedic colleagues necessarily. So what I mean by that is currently a lot of the AI tools that we have are open source. So it takes from basically a whole general collection of information as opposed to closed source, which would be relegated to specific data like orthopedics only or medicine only. Those are not as easily accessible. So most of our the things that are generated are substantially more general. And so, for example, I gave a talk on orthopedics to my daughter's kindergarten class, and AI created that talk for me, which was fantastic. It went over very well. It helps me to create images. So, you can type into ChatGPT, create me an image of an anatomical drawing of a shoulder overlooking Philadelphia for our next Philadelphia shoulder course. And it can do that for you very quickly, a beautiful picture, and you can use that in your advertisement. So you can imagine how many other types of photos you can generate and use for social media or advertising. The one area that I think it's concerning that is important to at least think about is, again, when AI can generate a lot of new things. And so one of the ways some people can start to use AI is to generate fake patient reviews. And so they can generate hundreds and hundreds of reviews for themselves that say they're the best thing ever. And, their scores go up substantially. So, I mean, that again is an ethical area where goes beyond research, but, should people be using AI in that fashion where, they falsely elevate their scores on a lot of platforms?
Yeah, and I think this is already happening outside of medicine, that like companies are doing this with their Amazon reviews. I mean, I'm sure you've seen this. You look at an Amazon product and you'd be like, how is it possible that there are 30,000 reviews of this thing that does not seem like it would be that penetrative in the general market? That's one of the downsides. One of the other potential downsides that I think a lot of people talk about is hallucination, which is kind of where the AI will generate false or misleading information. There's also concerns about bias, security, consent. Is if the information you're feeding it is copyrighted, is that a violation of copyright? What, Justin, have you seen as some of the guardrails we can use to manage these downsides or risks as we approach generative AI?
Yeah, I think, to kind of go back to the original point, you have to use it as a tool and not a replacement. If you are neglecting to review the content that it creates, then it's very susceptible to these, hallucinations where it'll come up with content and information that's false. And so I think also too, touching on Surena's point, most of ChatGPT is open source. It's the internet's been crawled and it's pulling stuff that's very easily accessible, things that are guardrailed by like PubMed and all the research that's not open source. That you would have to put it into it, and then that raises the question. Well, okay, you're putting information into ChatGPT. According to their guidelines, everything is individualized. It's not shared. It's all protected. But as any cybersecurity will tell you, all of that is very susceptible to being hacked, and then all that information's out there. There's actually a recent study looking, and they were all voluntary participants. 100 was Google, 100 was ChatGPT. Individuals are much more forthright to put very sensitive information about themselves or other content into ChatGPT. One, because it helps you get a little bit of a better answer, but two, it may be, they trust that source, or it works better for them than Google. And so, I think ChatGPT is kind of, our entry into this world. And then you're seeing all these little baby GPTs that are kind of being spawned out that do specific tasks, and, all the major, tech is coming out with their own versions, Bard and so forth. And I think what you're going to see is there are going to be rules about, and there's still a lot of litigation about this against, ChatGPT and OpenAI about stealing their content, stealing their information. As far as I'm aware, nothing's held up, and so it's definitely a big, gray, or black box of, what do we do with that? How do we protect our information?
Even maybe more complicated is the fact that even if you feed it something and it's not saved, if they're using that data to train on, theoretically, whatever you fed it is embedded somewhere within the model. Surena, what are your thoughts here? How do we kind of work around these potentially negative aspects with AI?
Yeah, I think we see that we've seen this already happen with other types of processes that we've utilized for years. And it's all based on the quality of data. This is really a discussion about data and its ability to be reprogrammed, reformatted to generate new data. But the old data is what pushes this along. And so, we've seen it with systematic reviews that use poor studies to generate a systematic review, and those systematic reviews may come up with conclusions that are not well supported because the input data is so poor. I mean, we've seen that for several decades now. This is no different. So the large language models that we use may, in fact, propagate prejudices or biases that are existent in the data. So, like, for example, there's a study that showed that a large language model recommended using less analgesic dosages for Black patients compared to white patients who had chest pain. And it's not because the AI itself has a bias, it's because the data that is within the AI would propagate that bias potentially unknowingly. So, additionally, you may find that the well-funded or high-income countries are contributing more to the body of knowledge for the large language model. So it may not consider perspectives of other societies or other cultures, and so what's generated may have bias that way. So I think this is all just a function of the data that we choose to enter into AI, and potentially as we get more focused in its use. If you have an orthopedic chat GPT where it's closed source and it really is only taking from the orthopedic data, then the output is likely to be better than if you have kind of open source AI and you're asking it very specific questions that it is not designed to answer. So to take it back to the systematic review kind of point, you have to be, when you do a systematic review or meta-analysis, as all of you guys know who have done this, you have to ask a proper question that can actually be answered with the data that's available. If there aren't good randomized controlled trials on a topic, you really can't ask that question because you're going to end up with a bad answer. And it's the same is true for AI. We have to get better at figuring out what questions it's capable of answering in an open source fashion, which questions it will need closed source information to answer, and which ones, frankly, can it not answer right now.
So what about more objective bodies of information? Say you want to use this for data analysis. Can this be relied on for basic or more advanced statistical measures? And if so, for those that don't have an in-house statistician or are looking to conduct some of this more nuanced research, what applications might you recommend, Justin?
I've played around with the statistics a little bit. I haven't done it enough to tell you one way or the other. I've had it review, some of our own studies and, explain more things than anything, explain what these, specific tests are, what it's testing for, and so forth. So it's been kind of used as an educational tool for me, but I think, yeah, it definitely can, and then it becomes the issue, if it's, all right, let's find something that has, a good p-value and let's publish that. I think that's also a slippery slope, is it clinically relevant? So, you could potentially see AI being used in those situations. But I know there are GPTs within ChatGPT that do specific statistical analysis, whether or not it's, biomedical type, information. I'm not sure. I don't know if you've played around with it at all, or Surena, if you've played with it.
Yeah, I mean, I've played with it a little bit too, and it can certainly do statistical work. But I think just like any application in clinically, it needs oversight. And so, AI tool may tell you what diagnosis the patient has, what treatment's most appropriate for them. But you need the clinician oversight. And similarly, from a research standpoint, I think you do need statistical oversight from somebody who does understand statistics at a higher level. So I think it's fine to have AI run through the data and to analyze it, but then I do think that data still needs to be put past somebody who's statistically trained.
Now, one of the things that I think is super interesting from a larger perspective is, one of the potential values here is in research or in finding information generally. So, traditionally, if you wanted to find something with Google, you would type in whatever your Google question was. Like, for instance, earlier this evening, my daughter asked, "What's the hottest temperature ever recorded on Earth?" So you can Google that question and you get 10 links, and contained in one of those links is the information that, was 134 degrees in Furnace Creek Ranch in Death Valley in 1913. But if you just want that specific piece of information and you ask ChatGPT that question, it probably can just give you the answer instead of giving you links. So are you guys using it currently for that kind of research? What about, and if you tried it for more specific questions about, like, for instance, what is the, DVT rate after reverse torsion arthroplasty, instead of maybe a traditional PubMed search where it can take a lot of digging to find a specific piece of information? Surena, are you using it at all in that context?
I use it for general questions like what you described pretty regularly. Almost every day, my daughters are asking me questions about things that I really have no idea about, and most of them involve animals or, what's the tallest mountain in the world, things like that. And so you're right, it gives you that answer very quickly in a way that Google may not give it to you quite the same way. In terms of medical questions, though, that's the problem, because if you ask it, for example, what's the DVT rate, it will access any open source information to give you the answer. Whereas we realize a lot of the papers that we look at are in PubMed. You need the institutional access to get to. So those are probably never in the large language model. And so, maybe that answer is still accurate in a lot of cases. It probably is because of the open source information. I think the more in-depth you get with your questions, the more it struggles.
Yeah, I've used it a good bit, just on a personal level, just, finance, life, translating, all that kind of stuff. There's actually like an almost Siri version of ChatGPT that works really well. And I know OpenAI is partnered with Apple, and all of that's kind of slowly rolling out over the subsequent months. And so you'll probably see most people will have a little bit more of a personal touch to AI as that all rolls out. I actually had a really cool case where, it was just playing around with AI, just seeing how far you can take it. And so I had ChatGPT, I had a distal femoral osteotomy, and I was correcting for valgus. And I was like, okay, well, I don't want to get out my pen and paper and trace it and tell me how many millimeters of a wedge I need to create. So I said, hey, ChatGPT, you're doing a distal femoral osteotomy, you're correcting for valgus. And I knew there was a paper. I didn't remember who the author was, but I knew there was a paper that if you knew the distal femoral width at the site of the osteotomy, that it could calculate how much to widen that osteotomy site. So I said, okay, the distal femoral width is 71 millimeters. You want to correct for 7 degrees of valgus. Please cite the manuscript and tell me how wide I need to open up my distal femoral osteotomy. And it did the calculation, showed me the equation, told me I need to widen it by 7.46 millimeters. It gave me a citation of the paper. I clicked on the link and it brought up that manuscript that I was thinking about. I was like, holy cow, this is pretty cool, and it did that in like a split second. And so I think there's definitely a lot of applications that you could use it. And it's all about asking it the right question and hoping, I guess, that it's got access to those articles and that data to be able to come out with it. And so I know there's been a lot of, papers, I've been reviewing papers, and there's been papers published in arthroscopy, JSES, and other journals looking at, the efficacy of it in mining data, diagnosis, reading x-rays, MRIs, and so forth. And it's going to be embedded in everything, in the next couple of years. And it's only just going to, I think, enhance things.
Justin, you lost me at femoral osteotomy.
We're gonna have to forgive you for mentioning a bone in the leg, because I think the rest of us all forgotten about the leg bones. That's the big long one, right? The femur.
Right. It's the humerus of the leg.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I want to thank both of you for coming on. I mean, this has been it's amazing to hear the various uses both of you have found for this technology, and I think it's so exciting to see it come out. And I think that what you brought up, Surena, is so important, that what's really exciting for the future is the ways in which it can take in specialized data sets. So, for instance, if one of the medical publishers can take all of the data they have, and then all of a sudden, we can get specific answers for questions like, what is the DVT rate after reverse shoulder arthroplasty? So the future is so bright for this technology if we can, take all of the data we have and feed it in. And I think both of you, it sounds like, have really come up with creative uses, and I'm sure our listeners are going to love to hear all the different things you're doing with it and find this useful as they approach all the problems they face in their lives.
Yeah, guys, such an intelligent take on a really heady topic. I think it gives us some actionable items that we can take back to our practices and certainly investigate both for our own education as well as for our patients. So I want to thank you both for taking the time on a late evening to join us.
Thanks so much for having us. And just my final comment to everybody is, if you're not familiar with this technology, you should try to get familiar with it because it's coming, like Justin said, and it's going to be all over everything. So the more you can leverage it to help you in your daily life, the better. And we're going to have to tailor our whole educational system to account for AI. So it's going to change the way that we do things. So getting familiar with it now, I think, is critical.
Yeah, completely agree. Jump on or get left behind. Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate you having us on.
Yeah, that's about all the time we have for the podcast. I just want to thank you so much for being our honored guests. For all our shoulder and elbow listeners out there, please don't forget to subscribe. And otherwise, we'll see you next time. Thank you.